I'm here with Linda Joy Myers. I have the pleasure of having her on the blog. We're going to talk about her new memoir, Song of the Plains, a memoir of family, secrets, and silence. Linda Joy Myers is president and founder of the National Association of Memoir Writers, where they offer free and membership programs to memoir writers. She is the author of two memoirs, the award-winning memoir Don't Call Me Mother and Song of the Plains, as well as two books on the craft of writing, The Power of Memoir and Journey of Memoir. A writing coach, she teaches memoir workshops and co-leads courses through a program she co-founded titled Write Your Memoir in 6 Months, which I have to say has got to be challenging. A therapist for 38 years, Linda Joy speaks about family, the importance of legacies, memoir writing, and the power of writing the truth. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her 2 cats and dozens of rose bushes. So welcome, Linda Joy. I'm really, really happy to have you today and to be able to talk with you about your new book, which I just, frankly, I'm such a fan. I think it's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. It's always great to hear that. So much.
Well, yeah. And, just having completed writing my own second memoir, which is now in the editing phase, I kind of had that question about when did you know that you wanted to write a second memoir?
I tried not to want that, because I thought, oh, gee, do I really, want to go into all that again? I mean, it's such a personal and challenging process to write a memoir, as you know. But I'm trying to remember because I started a first version of what turned out to be this book 2 years ago. And I was thinking about the kind of the archaeological dig of our lives, how things spiral backward in a way when we're looking at our lives. And I was also thinking I would write about the 60s and 70s in the new memoir. So I was having a couple of layers of it, and I did 80 short stories. I did 85,000 words of a new version of the memoir.
Wow.
And I didn't like it. I didn't feel that the voice was right. I didn't feel that I'd given the reader an experience that I wanted to give. There were other little questions that I couldn't have told you what they were then, because there were these semi-conscious hints that there was a story, another layer of story I didn't tell. Mm-hmm. And so what I did when I realized this, I needed to just stop. And I did, and I decided I wouldn't start writing again until I heard the voice in my head that I needed to use, and that I wouldn't even think about it. I would just let it all go and see what happened, which took a little.
Wow.
Yeah. But I found
that's really interesting.
I used to be a musician. I used to be a painter, and there's all this wisdom in other arts as well as in writing about truly letting something go, truly being in silence, when you don't know what direction to go in. And so I took that wisdom and I just went with it. And then I heard the voice that became the first chapter. And so I just wrote that and went, what am I doing? And then I realized the theme was the Great Plains. And I'll say more about that as you ask me questions. But once I had that little new beginning, then I had a different book, actually.
It's interesting because I do remember talking to you a long time ago when you were starting to write about what was going to be the 60s, 60s, 70s, or 50s through 70s, something like that. And so I was a little surprised when I saw you were coming out with a book, another memoir, Song of the Plains. And I have to say that first chapter is, it really sets the tone for the entire book. And it's that lyricism that is present throughout, really. And I mentioned it in my review of your book that I have personally struggled with a sense of place because I have moved a lot in my life. So I don't have that sense of grounding that I get when I read your words.
Oh.
So for a person like me, it actually gives me a way of feeling or of understanding that sense of place.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really, I guess what I'm trying to say is anyone who has that sense of place is going to recognize it immediately. But for people like me who don't or who struggle with that, it actually provides it. So it's,
Ooh,
yeah,
cool.
it was pretty amazing for me. Let's see here.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you about your challenges when you encountered writing it, and I think that you've kind of gone over a little bit of that with trying to find your voice. And they're really, as I view it, there are several stories in your memoir. I mean, you've got the kind of the carry through of your story of pain and loss in the relationship or lack of relationship with your mother, and your relationship with your grandmother. Then you also have the story of your research in your memoir of how you uncovered your family secrets and the drive to uncover those secrets. You have the family history itself, quite a bit in there, and then all of this is kind of embodied in the land. So there's a lot there, and I wanted to ask you about your process a little bit. When did you start seriously researching, going into the family archives? And then, this is a complicated one, how did you ultimately decide to weave these different components of the story together?
Okay. Well, the research began when I was 8 years old, when my great-grandmother told me the stories of her life in a feather bed in Iowa. And she started telling me about the 19th century, and I was just 8. She was 80. And she told me about things I had never heard of or imagined. The way the neighbor women midwifed the babies, how hard the work was on the farm, the making bread, the wood cook stove in the summer, feeding the harvesters of 20, 3 times a day, all kinds of amazing details. And then she told me, when she was telling me this, I was already living with my grandmother, her daughter, and my mother had left me. And my great-grandmother started talking to me about my mother when she was a little girl. And I was like, oh, she knew my mother? And this blew me away. And then of course it's obvious to us as adults, but no, she's the mother of my grandmother. So my grandmother was her baby, and whoa, So I got very curious then, because I didn't live with my mother. And, family stories, you hear some of them, you don't hear others. You don't hear the ones that are secrets or have shame attached. And so, but Blanche, my great-grandmother, she did say things like, it's terrible that your mother and your grandmother don't get along, and it makes my heart hurt, and I wish they'd stop arguing and fighting with each other. But she didn't approve of it, but it also made her sad. And that's a lot of story right there. There's like a huge story there.
Right. And it also validated your own sense of that fighting wasn't normal. I mean, you experienced a lot of pain and discomfort from it, but when you're growing up with it, you're not sure if that's how everybody behaves or not. And then, to get that validation that, no, this isn't normal. It's not supposed to be this way.
Extremely helpful. And that because I was so cut off from my mother, my father, and until this visit in Iowa, these were my grandmother's mother and then her half sibling. I didn't know about family. It turns out I'd met them when I was a little baby, but I didn't remember any of that. So I didn't know all these people existed, or this whole history of their family on the land all around. So one of the things we would do for fun is we'd all get in the car and we'd drive around. You do a lot of driving around in the Midwest just to explore things, And so we'd go to the cemeteries and walk around and say hello to people that were buried, and these people knew them, and then they go to the old houses that they had lived in, and they would sit there. And so one early time, my great-grandmother and grandmother, we drove to this house, and it was an old house, and it had a windmill next to it. And